I believe that's Market Street where the traffic is crossing. Where you see trees in the background now, is you'll now see the senior citizens high-rise. It's hard to believe that our track ever looked that poor, but at that point we were leasing it from the Illinois Central, and the maintenance was their problem. One of our earliest methods of loading coal was with a farm conveyor. That's Chuck the first summer when he came down on his vacation from high school, and fellas handed him the shovel and said, "Here, you're the fireman." The following year he graduated from high school, and the next day he was down in Marion, and he's been a full-time railroader ever since. If you don't recognize the 5, bear in mind that it came to us as a tank engine, which is the way it was originally built back in 1946 by the Porter Company, H.K. Porter of Pittsburgh. It was built for and used by the Central Illinois Public Service Company at their Maridosa power plant. If you'll remember, we did alternate trips running cab first and front first. And when you were running cab first, being that there was no tender, you had a fine view of the right-of-way coming in front of you. I don't have to tell you that the Illinois Central did not spend a whole lot of money in maintaining the track. It doesn't look like that now. The man on your right is Bill Schreiber, who, when we ran the tourist train, was our conductor. We operated the 5 as a tank engine throughout the 1973 season. That's my wife and daughter waving out the window. In December of 1973, the CONE ran a Santa Claus train. The local merchants gave tickets to the Marion area children, and on one Saturday, I believe it was the 7th of December, a beautiful day, incidentally. It was about 70 degrees that particular day. We hooked up the train, and this poor man got on the train with about 400 screaming kids and made like Santa Claus. You'll see that although the 5 is still a tank engine, we had acquired from the Illinois Central a tender. The tender at that point was our water supply. However, the bunker was still on the back of the 5's cab, so we couldn't get at the tender to take coal from it. After running a Santa Claus trip in the morning, the St. Louis Railroad Historical Society came over in the afternoon, and they had chartered the train, and we ran a fan trip just for them. This picture was taken off the I-57 overpass. This shot was taken out where Illinois 13 crossed the line as it went west beyond the SI Bowl and where our Piggyback ramp now is. The line was still intact, and at that time all the way over to Carbondale. And this is probably one of the few scenes that were ever made of the CONE train coming across Highway 13, because the track is no longer there. This was the last photo run by of that day, and this is the last picture of the 5 as a tank engine. Working over the winter of 1973-74, Ukraine and the rest of the fellows at the CONE remodeled what one might consider an ugly duckling into a beautiful 242 conventional locomotive with tender, and this is it in early 1974. It's hard to believe that this particular scene was taken off the old Highway 13, and now all those trees have been knocked down, and you get a perfectly clear view of the train as it passes in front of you. In those days, it was quite a jungle down there. Here we are backing the locomotive around the Y. Highway 148 crossing. This is a scene looking west from the I-57 overpass. Again, these pictures were shot in early 1974. The gate in those days was a rather elaborate wooden affair. A very cold morning in early April 1975. We're standing outside Bellefontaine, Ohio, watching a Penn Central high and wide, a dimension train. A train that's run only about once a week with very odd and large oversized loads in it. And one of the odd loads toward the end is COE number 17, heading home from New London, Connecticut, where it was purchased. Here you see the Penn Central local leaving the yards in Terre Haute, Indiana. The time is about 5 p.m. Again, this is early April. The tank cars are destined for the Velsicol plant at the Illinois-Indiana border. Toward the end of the train, again, is number 17 on its way to Marion. The figure in the cab is Chuck Jr. He rode the train the entire distance from New London to Marion, the 17's cab. It was a cold, lonely ride. I chased him in the car to help him get from the various railroad yards to motels and restaurants. Interstate 70 going under the Penn Central tracks at the Illinois-Indiana border. The very last vestiges of daylight, and silhouetted as the train crosses is, again, number 17. It took 16 days to get the 17 from New London to Marion. Unfortunately, most of the travel was done in the wee hours of the morning. The train would leave one division point at about 1 a.m. and get in 5 or 6 the next morning at the next spot. And photography was quite difficult. And it wasn't until we got closer to home that we started running in daylight hours. Here you see an Illinois Central local from Effingham heading toward Centralia, crossing the stone bridge, or the concrete bridge, just south of Effingham, near the Watson-Mason interstate turnoff. And once again, the 17 is in the consist. Route 37 follows the tracks pretty closely from Effingham south to Salem. And I was able to get some pictures pacing it. Speed was supposed to be held at 25 miles an hour, but I'm sure that in more than one instance we were up to 45 or 50. The particular diesel pulling this train conked out about 10 miles out of Centralia, and they had to send the yard switcher out to pull us in, and we delayed the Shawnee passenger train, among other things. So I imagine if the 17 could have had a fire in it, they'd have been grateful for help. This bridge is a little further south toward Edgewood. And just south of Kinmundy, there's an old icy water tower still standing. And I thought it would be appropriate to get a shot of a steam locomotive going by a water tower in 1975. Here we are coming into the yard at Centralia. And there you see Chuck just having gotten off the locomotive, and Herb Soberg talking about the trip. The CO&E tourist train tragically suffered a loss June 13th of 1977. The fire broke out on the platform alongside the coaches, a freight platform, wooden, at about midnight, and quickly spread to the overhang of the roof, and once it got up there, it was like a prairie fire. It went across the depot in a matter of minutes. Effectively destroyed the building, the soda parlor up front, our offices, the gift shop in the middle, and our shops in the back, as well as the two passenger cars that were parked alongside of it. This was the following morning. The fire department was still putting water into the building. And at this particular moment, I don't think anyone would have been able to tell you for sure that the CO&E would continue. Here you see some of the very first CO&E freight in the fall of, in October of 1977. As you recall, the depot burned in June of 77, and that probably would have put the CO&E out of business, except that in March of 77, we had completed negotiations with the Illinois Central for the purchase of the railroad, and the subsequent takeover of the freight. However, it took from March until October of that year to get the Interstate Commerce Commission approval for us to actually assume the freight operation. So after the depot burned, we continued to run our passenger train with our remaining passenger cars in the 5 for the rest of that summer, although business had dropped off drastically because people knew the depot was no longer there and they just thought trains weren't running anymore. However, in October of '77, we did receive the Interstate Commerce Commission's blessing, and we began moving freight and effectively became a steam-only freight operation. Here you see one of our first freight trains crossing Main Street. Here it is crossing Creel Springs Road, headed for the grain elevator. As I recall, fall of '77 was a good year for the farmers in the area. The grain elevator had quite a bit of business, and there was hopper cars were in short supply, so the grain elevator took boxcars and coopered the doors so that they wouldn't leak, and we loaded out quite a few cars that fall. Our track to the east ends about 7 car lengths beyond the switch into the grain elevator, which makes switching out there somewhat difficult. There is no runaround track anymore, and all the cars have to be put up into the grain elevator, and after they're loaded, we let them roll out on gravity so that we can be at the right end to pull them back into town. This was the spring of 1978. Again, our freight train is crossing Main Street, headed east toward the grain elevator. There's a big Caterpillar earth mover destined for Fabics. Here is our very first coal. This we hauled in the summer of '78. There were several small operators that began reclaiming coal in the area. They go and work the gob piles from some of the defunct coal mines from back in the old days, and with modern technique they can wash out the dirt and the rock, and it leaves a fine coal. Some people refer to it as carbon, which is ideal for power plant use. And throughout the summer of '78, the fall, and through the spring and summer of '79 and into the fall, we hauled quite a bit of coal. Unfortunately, when the recession hit, the need for coal dropped off drastically, and this type of operation, which was selling on the spot market as opposed to being under contract, disappeared. There have been rumors that the market's going to open up again, but so far it's only been rumored. Number 5 was good for about 500-ton hopper cars from our coal loading site, which was out near the grain elevator, back into town. It's uphill most of the way, about a 1% grade, and while she might have taken more than 5, we felt that 5 was a good enough load, and that was basically all the cars that they wanted out there at one time anyway. But it was not uncommon for us to assemble a train of 10, 11, 14 copper cars loaded with coal, so that when the Mopac came in, they had their work cut out for them. Here you see a Mopac train. They had come down from West Frankfort. They had gone south of our line into Marion, into downtown Marion, where they ran around the empties, brought them back, left them out on the main while they pulled in, grabbed the loads, and they would pull the loads off the interchange. Then they'd back the loads down, grab the caboose, the empties, and whatever other freight they had for us, and deposit that on the interchange, and then head back north to West Frankfort. And this probably was a load of lumber for Woolahan Lumber Company. And there's a new string of empty hopper cars to be filled with coal again. And after the mop would be through with their switching, we'd come out with the 5. There you see Chuck with the 5. Grab the empties. Then you get the empties out of the way and take 4 or 5 5 at a time out to be loaded and brought back in as loads. And now we get the piggyback. And I believe this was January or February of 1979. Through the fall of 78, we had put the piggyback ramp in out at the Y. However, the wet conditions out there and the fact that the track was new and didn't have a whole lot of ballast under it made it rather difficult to work out there. So we set up a temporary ramp next to the depot in town. We took the truck off of one end of the flat car and let it down on the ground to use as a ramp to drive up, and then we'd park our rest of our empty flats next to it, and he could load that way. We did that for a month or two until we could stabilize the track out at the piggyback ramp. The fellow driving the truck is Bill Onifree, who was the consolidator that did our piggyback business for us. Although about a year ago, in fall of '84, spring of '85, he was killed in an automobile accident up in St. Louis. Now here we are out at the piggyback ramp later that year. Is bringing a string of pigs in from the west end. I believe this is around Bainbridge Road. Our piggyback business was quite good for a year and a half or so until the MOPAC, along with other railroads, decided that satellite ramps such as ours weren't a good economic policy, and they began establishing what they call hub centers in the major cities and sending their truck lines out for 200 miles in any direction from the hub, which, needless to say, from St. Louis takes in the Marion area. And as a result, the potential piggyback traffic that could go out over our ramp is going to St. Louis instead and being put on flat cars there. They think they're saving money by doing it. Maybe they are, I don't know. Here you see the pig train being put on the interchange. Here we see a meet between the COE and the MOPAC. On this particular occasion, we were to get 10 or 11 hopper cars from the MOPAC, which we loaded with coal out at our coal loading ramp. What we didn't know was that instead of just giving us the 10 or 11 hopper cars, the MOPAC gave us their whole train, which was some 30 to 35 cars, and expected us to pull them up and then cut off the 11 later on. The 5 did slip once, but then she dug in and she pulled that train. And we kind of think that maybe a few dollars changed hands between the old heads and the new guys on the MOPAC, because they had 2 or 3 units to pull that train into town. And of course the 5 isn't the biggest thing in the world, but it pulled those cars. Here you see us bringing the train to a stop, and the MOPAC brakeman is going to cut off the required number of cars. July 1978. We're at the Rosy Clare Lead and Fluorspar Mining Company in Rosy Clare, Illinois, approximately 60 miles southeast of Marion. Here you see what is now CO&E number 1, where it had reposed in this mine since about 1955. The owner of the mine had died. His estate gave number 1 to the city of Marion and the CO&E, and we spent 2 days in Rosy Clare getting it ready to pull out of the fallen down engine house where it had been, and we got a lowboy flatbed truck and a driver that had courage enough to pull that 36-ton machine over the highway, and we loaded it up, and it made quite a hit going over the hilly, turny, 2-lane roads in southern Illinois, listening to other truckers on the CB telling one another, look out, there's a locomotive coming down the highway. As you can see, the windows had been pretty much smashed out of it. As I recall, it sat in the truck yard over Friday night, and then on Saturday morning, White Brothers brought the crane over, and we positioned the flatbed trailer over the track out at our coal ramp. The crane lifted the locomotive up. The truck drove out from underneath it. And then number 1 was slowly lowered to the rails. The lad doing the pushing there is Dave Decco, a young fella that's a good friend of ours from up in Chicago area, and a member and now secretary of the Illinois Live Steamers. He used to work summers on the CO&E. Here you see number 5 coming in from the east end, pulling a couple of empty fertilizer cars, and behind them, number 1, looking rather diminutive behind the 100-ton hoppers ahead of it. the house track. While it was not under steam at that point in time, it was a year before it would see a fire in its boiler. Number 5 was pushing and pulling the 17, and in that particular shot it was hiding behind the 17, so it looked like the 17 was moving under its own power. That's perhaps one of the few pictures taken that showed all the CO&E motive power in one spot at one time. The 5 pulling the 17, pulling the 1. It's the fall of 1978. We're on the Illinois Central Main Line heading south toward Carbondale after joining the main line at DuQuoin. Here you see an Illinois Central work train heading north. The occasion for us to be out there, and at this point we're on a siding awaiting the passage of several trains, northbound coal train and the southbound Shawnee Amtrak train to Carbondale. The siding at this point, as you can see, is actually between the two main line tracks. The occasion for us to be out there was the trip that we ran for Governor Thompson, who in fall of '78 was running for re-election. And he thought it would be real nice to make a whistle-stop tour from Cairo up to DuQuoin and then over to Benton. So on Friday, we took our train. The Mopac pulled us up to Benton, and then under our own power, with the 5, our 2 regular passenger cars, and Bill Shriver's private car, we headed from DuQuoin, from Benton to DuQuoin over the Illinois Central branch line, and then joined the main line and went from DuQuoin down to Carbondale, where you just saw us taking on coal, and then south from there toward Cairo. Here we are in the hills down near McCanda. I was riding on the back platform of Bill Shriver's car and taking the movies as best I could. We spent the night in Cairo, sleeping in Bill's private car. And then on Saturday morning, we did the necessities to the locomotive, like cleaning the ash pan and making sure we had sufficient coal and water. And then, with every Republican politician in the southern half of the state, as well as Governor Thompson and his wife, and I believe their daughter was on the trip too, we headed north from Cairo on a magnificent day. I decided on Saturday morning that rather than ride the train, I would pace it. I don't believe the governor ever went anywhere in grander style. We made our first stop in Ulm, and the governor made a speech. And there you see, and here you see Channel 6 from Paducah filming our train while I was filming them. Every stop, of course, drew a big crowd of onlookers to the 5. I think they were more interested in that than they were in the governor. This is somewhere just south of Anna Jonesboro, where we stopped and did another speech. Now here we are coming around the bend at Cobden. I have movies taken in 1973, in December of 73, at this very site, where the Illinois Central had a horrendous wreck head-on between a merchandise train and a coal train, which killed 5 or 6 railroad men. It took quite a few days to clean up. But the track is clear now, and number 5 is doing a job. There's the governor waving from the back platform. This is at McCanda. One of those fellows with the camera is a fellow named Jerry Mart, who was taking quite a few pictures on the CONE. He's written stories that appeared in Trains magazine on it, and the picture right now, as the train crosses that little bridge, was in an early 1979 issue of Trains magazine. The train stopped for a couple of hours in Carbondale while the governor had lunch and made some more speeches. And then late in the day proceeded on up to DuQuoin. Here you see us backing off the main line at DuQuoin, while the Shawnee is headed north towards Chicago. I take the time of this to be about 4:30 in the afternoon. It's the end of June 1979. You just saw the 17 come in from New London, Connecticut in the spring of 75. We spent 4 years working on the 17, and as time would permit. We remodeled the looks of the locomotive. The feed water heater beetle brow was removed. The cab was remodeled. The vestibule was removed, so it was, instead of a Canadian all-weather cab, it's now a more American-type open cab. The boiler was completely rebuilt inside. Superheaters removed. New flue sheets put in, and new flues in the boiler. And here you see Herb Soberg lighting the match that will put a fire in the firebox for the first time since 1963, when the Canadian Railroad that used to own the 17, the Roehm and Saguenay, last used the locomotive. There you see number 1 sitting, waiting for its motor, which wouldn't be put in for several years yet. start the air pump for the first time in about 12 years, and it ran flawlessly. Here you see her boiling the bell ringer. He was up in the cab. It was his intent to move the locomotive back and forth just several feet, see if everything would work or not. We really didn't have any coal to speak of in the tender. In fact, as I recall, it was up there in about a dozen 5-gallon buckets and a minimum amount of water in the tender. And there you see it moving under its own power for the first time in quite a while. It was coupled to the 5, but the 5 did not have a fire in it at the time. It was not under steam. At any rate, Hugh moved the locomotive, the 17, back and forth a few times and was confident that all was well with the workings. And the more times he moved it, the more comfortable he got with it. And before the day was over, we took it out on the main. We went east to the grain elevator. And we picked up an empty car or two, as I recall, that was out there. All on just those few buckets of coal. Needless to say, we were ecstatic about what we saw that day. The fellow walking along alongside the engine is Norm Mazonik, who was an Illinois Central engineer from Chicago. He's a stockholder in the COE. And he's got enough whiskers that he actually worked on steam in the late 50s on the Illinois Central. I should say the mid-50s. And there she is, running proud. For the first time in a good many years. The boiler still wasn't lagged. It still needed the insulation and the sheet metal work on it. Here you see that sheet metal being applied. Cut the sheet metal to fit right on the ground and applied it over 2-inch thick fiberglass block insulation. Some of the itchiest stuff you'd ever want to work with. Here we have the fall of 1979. 17 is coming in from the east end, crossing Main Street, pulling a string of coal cars. That's when we still had coal loading going on out there. I get a chance to take a second picture of it doing exactly the same thing because this was also the day that NBC was in town to film the segment that they used on their NBC nightly news program. we are coming up alongside the depot. And there you see the NBC News crew on top of the roof of the wooden caboose. Here's number 17 on a regular run out to the Piggyback ramp. In 79, we had quite a bit of Piggyback traffic. This is the Bainbridge Road crossing. There's a group of our Piggyback flat cars. Those were formerly Erie Western cars. And a string of our trailers, some of our white ones from Strict, and some of the gray ones that were Fruhoffs. Crossing at Highway 148. And I believe here we're backing around to Y. Since our Piggyback ramp is a circus load type ramp, the flat cars all have to be facing in the proper direction. Now, this red flat car in front of you is one of our COER flats, and it's going around Horseshoe Curve. This was the fall of 1979. My wife and I had been to York, Pennsylvania for a train collectors meet there, and as was our practice, we always took a side trip to Horseshoe Curve, and it was a great thrill to see some of our equipment in one of Conrail's trains. Gorgeous October weather, beautiful coloring. Probably one of the nicest railroad spots in the entire United States. There you see the K4 that was on display up there. I understand that that is no longer up there. It's been taken down for refurbishment and perhaps actually running under steam again. And in its place, a GP something or other has been planted. Nice thing about Horseshoe Curve is you never have to wait very long for some railroad action. I believe when I took these pictures in 79, the 4 tracks were still in place, but since then, one has been taken up. Stanley Crane of Conrail had claims that if Conrail's February 1980, the engine house is brand spanking new. number 5 is sitting alongside. It hadn't run in about 7 months. Ever since July of '79 when we got 17 under steam. The engine house was a godsend. Prior to that, all the maintenance had to be done outdoors, and in winter, that's no easy task.